So what I thought we could work with today, I thought we could start in on array lists, because we're supposed to have read about array lists. Array lists are actually a lot easier than regular arrays in a lot of ways. So you have to think of programming language, especially like Java, is going to have these classes called collection classes. And in the collection classes are pre-made data structures. So they're data structures that we can just ready-made. It's like going to the store and buying some ready-made dough and putting it in the oven, right? So these are pre-made data structures. So there's a data structure for each kind of, well-known, well-made data structure out there for every programming language. And for arrays, we use something called an array list. Sometimes, and you'll hear people using vectors, V-E-C-T-O-R-S. Okay. Vectors are another type of data structure that would work very similar to array lists. Okay. But in here we're just going to use array lists. That's what your book uses. And it's a good data structure. And they're pre-made data structures. So you can look in the Java API. So if I go over to Java API and look up array list, and hopefully you read about it in your book also. But remember, you can always look online at what these things are. And it's a resizable array. And this is where its main strong point is. When we were working with arrays and we were making these data or this array to hold our data, right? To hold our objects. One of the main limitations we had is that we had to know the size of the array up front, right? And in that one homework problem, I said, well, what if you didn't know the size of the array? What would you have to do to make the array bigger? You had to make a brand new array, then copy and it had to be bigger than the old array. So your old array, new array. Okay. And you had to take the contents of the old array and copy it to the new array. And that's the only way you can get a larger array. You can't all of a sudden tell the computer, hey, I want my array bigger. It doesn't let you. Okay. But array lists let you. So an array list, its underlying implementation is an array, and they take care of the resizing for us. So when it needs to be a bigger size, the underlining kind of architecture or the implementation of this array list, it makes itself bigger. So we don't have to worry about it. So it's like having a resizable array. Okay, which is its main strong point. We don't have to worry about the size of our array. We just have to worry about, filling it. Okay. Now it does use what's called the list interface, and we will learn about the list interface next, but we're just going to use the array list today. Okay. Let's look at some of its main methods. So of course it has a constructor. And array list uses something called generics. And the generics means that you can tell the array list which type of objects you are holding, and so you replace that E right there with which type of objects your array list is going to hold. And it makes it more data safe and more data type specific by telling it which objects you're going to hold it. And so when you see this constructor down here, we'll use the constructor that uses that generic implementation. Now there's 3 different types of constructors, and one of the constructors you can actually tell the array list how big you want him to start out as. Otherwise, he's just some arbitrary amount. So you can tell your array list how big you want him to be, or just let him be the default size. When you want to add something into your array list, you use the add method. When you want to clear your array list, you can use the clear. You can see if it contains a certain value. You can get a certain value at a certain index. So we can iterate through our list using the get method. You can figure out the index of a certain element. You can see if it's empty. You can see if it's full. We can use iterators to go through our array list. We have all these methods. Size is important. We can figure out what size our array list is, the number of elements in the list. And we can turn our array list into a regular array using this method here. So notice that if we wanted to, we could convert our array list into a regular array also. Okay. So I thought we could work on an array list and use some real life data. And the data I thought we could use, I was just randomly looking online for some data. And I found this data here, and it was California educational attainment and personal income data. And it looks, let me go ahead and I'll bring it up so you guys can start downloading it, and then we can take a look at it. For some reason I forgot to copy and paste it in here. I'll put it in our class assignments. So we'll practice with our array list and also read in data like we have been doing. So I'll put that link there. And this is what our data looks like. So these will be our fields. This will be our instance variables. This will be our data variables. Okay, these will be what we're reading in. Okay, to our objects. Remember, every object will represent a record in our file. So it never really matters what your data is, as long as it's in a readable format like CSV. In fact, when you follow that link, download the CSV one. When you click on it, when you follow that link, it is, oops, dang it. It was this one right here that was CSV. And you would click on the download button right here. And it was the California Educational Attainment and Personal Income 2008 to 2014. And it was some data that they collected between these years. And they asked just random people, I guess. I don't know who they asked. But they collected their age, their gender, what educational attainment they had. And there was certain categories that they had. They collected how much personal income they had. And then which part of the population answered yes to that. Huh? You don't think it what? Oh. Oh, dang it. I'm like, what's taking people so long? Hold on, I'll move to the front. So I thought it looked like interesting data that we could use. So you can scroll down and you can look at that data. I'll wait a couple seconds for people to collect that data. But pretty much for every year, they ask people these questions: their age, their gender, what educational attainment they had, what's their personal income, and then this population count means which part of the population answered yes to all those. So what part of the population included those values. Okay. So note that, when we read in CSV files, it's pretty easy to read them in. That's why we've been kind of looking for CSV files that we could read in. Now there's one thing that we need to do to the CSV file to make it so our program will like it. And what will we need to do? You guys realize what we need to do? It's actually really easy to do in Excel. In fact, did everybody's file open in Excel? When you download it, if it did not open in Excel, right-click it, say Open With, and Open with Excel. You might have to choose the default program and look for Excel. And I'll make sure everybody gets their data first. We need to put zeros in for these blanks right here. Okay. So I can scroll down and make sure there's not more blanks, but in the other columns there's not going to be blanks. The only one that's going to have any kind of blank data is in our population count. And so if you hover your mouse over that column, select the entire column, and then go to find and select over here, the little binoculars on the right on your home tab. Tell it to replace. What we're going to do is we're going to replace, find what? Find a blank and replace with a 0. Actually, let me make sure that, yeah, that does it right. And it says we made 34 replacements. And just to see that it did it right, if you ever want to jump to the bottom of a column, because if your column's really long, it takes way too long to scroll in Excel. If you put your mouse over any cell and it becomes the 4-headed arrow on the bottom of that cell and you double click, it'll take you to the bottom of the column where there's a blank, and as long as it doesn't stop anywhere, it means there's no blanks in there anymore. Okay, so now we have some good data that we can work with. Okay, this is some good data. We can ask it, we can read it into some objects. We know our instance variables names. And we can ask it some questions like, what is the biggest number in that column for every year? We could split it up by years. Okay. All right. We'll have to do a little bit of work to get our year out of there, but it'll be okay. So remember where you saved it. So save as. Save it somewhere. It's in downloads, that's fine. I'm going to do one more step, then I'll come around and make sure everybody gets their data or has their data. The next step would be to make your project and drag your data into that project folder, right? So remember, like we've been doing all along, we make a new project folder. This could be educational income or something. And then go to your downloads folder where you saved that file. Actually, you might have to close the file first after you saved it. And then drag him to that folder and copy him in there. That's good. Everybody started in on this. So you should have made a new class. Remember, I don't really mind what you name your classes, but just that you start it with a capital letter. That's the Java standard, so we try to stick to that. And you usually try to name your class something that it's holding. It's educational income data. I'll probably name it something like that. But let me make my test class. So I told you guys to make your test class. And in your test class, you're just going to try to read it in. Don't worry about making an object yet. We'll just read in our data because that's what I told you guys to work on. And how do we read in our data? Hopefully you have an older program you can copy and paste your reading file code from. In fact, you can just copy and paste the whole method if you wanted to. And remember that we're going to read in the data inside of our test class. So we're going to have two classes. I went ahead and made both of them, but you can make this one later. But he's going to hold an object, which is a record inside of my file, right? He's going to have the instance variables inside of him. And then my test class is the one that's going to read in the file. So did you guys make a test class where you copied and pasted that file reading code into? I think everybody, you know, and if you don't have this copy paste code, remember there's some in Blackboard. That file reading code that we use. It's in Blackboard. We're still going to have all the same stuff. The try catch block, opening our file. We can still leave this in here if we wanted to because our file does have that header line. Remember that we read in this header line because that's our name of our fields and we didn't want to read that into an object. Now I might use some of this code later, but I'm going to go ahead and comment it out because I'm not going to use him now. So the only thing that's running in my while loop is I'm reading in that line and I'm just printing it out. Because remember, we want to make sure we can read from the file first before we start doing anything else. Right? So when you're testing these things, that's the first thing you should always test. Is make sure you're connecting to the file and reading it first. Don't bother reading it into an object right away. Okay? And then at the very end, outside of my while loop, so this is the end of my while, then you close your input stream. This is the end of the read file method. So that should be pretty simple for you guys to do, to copy paste that and have that read file method in here. And then when we want to read the file, we can copy and paste that code too. But pretty much when we read in our file, actually I'm going to copy and paste my class name here. Remember to call an or a method that's inside of our class. We have to make an object called our test. We can call him anything. He will have to be constructed. So remember, I named my test class a really long name. But this is the class that I'm in, that I'm reading this data in, so I have to make a test so that I can call the read file method. And the reason that I made this method not static was so that later on I can make that instance of my array of objects and I could use that inside of my read file method. And then you would just use that object to call your read file method. Read in file. And here's where we're going to put our long file name. I think I'm going to try to shorten this file name. So if I right click on it, does it let me rename him? Actually, I think I'll go, it doesn't let me rename him here, does it? Okay. So how can we force it to let us rename him? You don't technically have to rename him. You could type in that long file name. But if I really wanted to rename him, I go to my project folder, click once on him, wait a couple seconds, click again, and it'll let you rename him. And I'm going to name it something smaller. And then keep the CSV modifier on there. Well, it doesn't really matter. You could put any modifier or any extension that you want, actually. It's not going to change anything for us because it's a plain old text file. It doesn't matter what file extension we give this thing. I could give it .kanemoto if I really wanted to. Okay, doesn't really matter about it only matters to the operating system so he knows what application to open it with. Okay, so I can do a Control-C and copy that, and then Control-V and paste that in here. Now if you went like me and you changed the name of this file, you You can right click on your project and hit refresh, and he will refresh and see the new file name in there. So if you right click on your project, or just hit F5. F5 is your shortcut. Now you should be able to read in your data. So it should just spit out your data, and it did have trouble opening him up. So this is why we do this test, so that we can see if there's trouble opening him up. Oh, and it put the modifier on there twice. So actually when you renamed it, you didn't have to put that file extension on there. So you see what I did? I put the file extension on there, and then the operating system put the file extension on there for me. So I could go in there and rename him again. Or just go like this too. So the file names just have to match. So this will work, but it'd probably be best to go and rename him just without the file extension. Ah, yes, and then we read our data. So maybe I should make sure everybody can read in their data first. After we read in our data, now we want to read in our data inside of an array list of our object type. So I'll let you guys start in on this as I walk around and make sure everybody can read in their data and help debug, right? The next step will be to make an object for one of our records. You guys remember making your object? If you forget your field names, or you want to copy and paste your field names, which is much easier than writing them, you could drag your CSV file to your Eclipse window. You'll open in Eclipse, and then you could copy that line with our field names in it. Come over here to your object template that you've created. Now remember that we do want lowercase, and we do want them to be private, and we do have to declare their type. Okay, so for each of these instance variables, or these data variables, we want to make them look like regular instance variables. You guys remember doing this? So we can have an object to represent a record inside of our data. Then we can make an array list of these objects and read them into the array list. So like we've been doing the last couple of class times. I'm going to pause and make sure everybody is reading in their... And we do this so that we stick with Java standards, make them all lowercase instance variable names. Yes, Jason?
The educational attainment are the same variable, and personal income are the same variable.
Oh, okay.
Same with population.
Oh, that's what you're telling me.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And then this last one was the only one that we could be an integer. So that's what I get for not looking at my data properly. Yes, educational and attainment are actually one variable, and personal income is one variable. And actually, population count is one variable. All right, that looks a little bit better. That looks like our data. And then the last one, let's make it an integer. So that should have been no problem, and I saw a lot of people had that already written in their code, so good job. Okay, just make sure there are lowercase, like I said. Now our constructor, if you made your constructor, excellent. We're going to make our constructor in the same way that we made our other constructor when we took in a string with our record info. And remember, this string will be a string that's one line of data inside of our, inside of our data file. And we'll split it up into an array of strings before we send it, which makes sense. So we can have a constructor that takes in an array of strings, which will be our instance variables in order. Okay. And I know that this might be, you might think, oh, it's kind of breakable code because they'd have to send in the exact order. But a lot of times you do write code like this and it's okay because a lot of the files that get produced will be in that exact order all the time. So you can write stuff like this.
Would that work with the variables having spaces in between year and age and
Yeah, because we can tell it to split with the comma. So it'll split it in reference to the comma. As long as there's not more commas in there, then we're okay. And actually, maybe we better check that out really quick. So as long as there's no commas within our data, which there doesn't seem to be. Oh, there is. Oh, no. This comma here is separating the 0 to 17, so we're okay.
what about the income?
Oh, the income.
That's not very good.
Yeah, we could take out all the commas and make something that would take a while.
Should we purge income? Pretend it doesn't exist?
Actually, what if we opened with, I mean, we could take it in as just strings and then, or a string, and then parse it inside of our file. What if I did a find and replace?
Oh, I see it.
Oh, that actually worked.
No.
What'd you do?
This will actually be much easier. You could right click and open it in Excel. And the reason that we want to do this, remember, is so that we can parse it easily. Of course, we can parse it the other way too, but it just takes a little bit longer, and why do that to ourselves? So, I just got rid of the commas in that column. And the way I got rid of the commas in that column is I clicked on that column, so I opened it in Excel. From Eclipse, in your Project Explorer, you could right click on that program maybe and say open with other, or even easier, go to your downloads folder, right click, say open with Excel, and then click on that column. And in the same way we replace the spaces with the 0, we're going to replace the comma with nothing. So you select that column, then you click on find and select, replace, or Control R. And what I did is I typed in a comma for find what, and replace with I just left blank, so it replaces it with blank. Did I ruin other things?
No, there are some commas in educational attainment as well.
Oh.
From college, comma, less than 4-year degree.
So maybe just click on all of them. Find and select, replace, and replace the comma with nothing, replace all. Actually, 263 replacements.
Those are the commas in educational attainment.
Oh, okay.
Just
And
actually correct.
like I said, we could have read it in differently, but
Easier to change the file.
everybody did that. Then you save it. It'll say, hey, do you want to keep using CSV format? Say yes. Now, if you're like me and I opened the one that was in downloads, I need to replace the one that's inside of my project folder with the one that's from downloads that I fixed. So I'll right click on my project folder and tell it to delete that one. And then just drag the new one in there, pretty easy. Remember to copy them, don't link to them, just copy it. And in this way, we'll be sure to read in a file without extra commas, because extra commas do mess us up when we split up it based on commas. Oh, and I do have to rename him now. And the reason I have to rename him is because I named him this in my code. If you didn't change the name, then you won't have to replace his name. then just make sure again that you can read in that data, that it reads in without the commas. And we'll just have to make sure that we do that next time right away, get rid of our commas. Yes, Douglas?
Can you put the new data? I don't have Excel.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and if you couldn't do it or you just want to use the data that I just fixed, go ahead and go to Blackboard and grab that data.
So what comments did you remove? Like,
I replaced all of them. I just selected the whole data table. So I selected all the columns. And then I went to find and replace. And I replaced the comma with nothing.
but where do we see the difference?
Where do you guys see the difference?
Yeah, if we print it out, it still comes out the same, right?
Oh yeah, but we'll see the difference when we go and we want to parse it. So when we go and we run this line of code right here, well, we're going to split that record. So we're going to read in one line. We're going to read in one line from that data. And we're going to split it based on the comma. Now commas are still in there, even though we replaced all the commas that were in the columns in Excel. The commas that we don't see are the ones that put it in the separate columns in Excel. So if I were to take this data, let me refresh really quick, and open it here, see how it still does have these commas. Those commas are we're telling Excel, hey, this is a new column. When Excel opens it, he doesn't show us these commas because he's putting this data in new columns for us. That's why it's called a comma separated value file. Excel knows how to open these, and when it sees commas, okay, it separates them into a new column. But our commas will mess us up, we learned last time, so we'll go ahead and take them out of that file. And we spent a long time doing that. This might have to be a continuation project, I think. Now we should be able to knock out this constructor, the accessors and mutators, and at least read it into an array list, okay? Now our constructor is going to follow the same methodology like I said we did before, where it's going to take in that string, an array of strings. So when I make my constructor, he's going to look like this. Now remember, your constructor should be the same name as your class with no return type. And in our constructor, we're going to read in the data in this order, so just make sure your data is in the same order that your file is, because that will matter when we send it this string. Now remember, in our constructors where we set our instance variables, and we're going to set it equal to the value that we're giving it here in the parameter. So remember, like how we did before, that'll be index 0, this one will be index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4, and index 5. And that'll be our 5 strings that we're sending into our constructor. So remember to change our index numbers so they don't all equal the year. And then our last string that we send, we need to convert this string into an integer to be inside of our count variable, our population count variable. Hopefully you kind of remember how to convert this string into an integer. You go to that integer wrapper class and use that parse int method that takes in the value of a string. And converts it to an integer for us. That's normally how we convert those strings to integers for us. that's the only hard part, really, is that constructor. The getters and setters are pretty straightforward. Hopefully you got those no problem. So you go to source, generate your getters and setters. You might as well make all of them, even though we might not use them all, but hey, it's easy. So there's all of our getters and setters. We can access all of our private instance variables. And then last but not least, we should make our toString method so that we can see the output of an object of this type. And it should generate a nice toString method for us. It doesn't look too bad. Because we have mostly strings and an integer, it knows how to create that toString method pretty nice. So then it just kind of spits out all of our instance variables for us so we can see the value of these things. Because when we start to search for, like, let's say who has made the most money overall, right? We want to ask it questions like this. What educational attainment did they have? We can spit out those records that match that criteria. So we got our instance variables, we have our constructor, we got our accessors and mutators, we have our toString. Our class template to hold an educational income data item is complete. Yes? Alright, so remember to save that. Okay. So yeah, it does take a little bit of work to make the constructor and to set up our data, but after that it was pretty easy. All right. So we know we've read in our data in this while loop. We all saw that we printed out that line. Now we need to split up the line we just read in, and a lot of people kept this line in their code, I saw it. And wherever there's a comma, and that's why we got rid of the extra commas, so we can split it up properly. Then we're going to create a record object to encapsulate the record. So a record in our file means one line in our file. So we're going to make type, and you guys might have named your type different than mine, but this is our template. I'm going to make a record of type educational income data. So he's going to be my new record. I'll want to use that constructor I just made. That's why I made it. And in that constructor, it's going to take my record strings. So we have to have this split method returns an array of strings, which is our line of data we just read in. And I can give that as the argument to my constructor. And then I could go ahead and I can make sure that it's creating that record right. Okay. By just printing them out. Now remember, this print line is going to print an object of type educational income data. So it's going to call the educational income data's toString method. Remember that when you put an object inside of system.out.println, it calls their toString method. And remember, we did that all inside of our while loop as we're reading in our data. You can comment out your system.out.println up at the top. And now you can test this system.out.println that's making a new record properly. Notice I commented this one at the top so it's not too much console output. So he should read in every object and create, or every line of data. He reads in each line of data. He splits up that line of data. He sends in that splitted up line of data, then that array of strings, into our constructor. Our constructor constructs a new object of that type. And then we do our system.out.println and it calls the toString method for that object. And you should see your data printed out like this with the toString method. And if you don't, this is a good place where you'd stop and make sure that everything is working. So remember, you test as you go. You make sure things work. Okay, okay, I'm going to do one more step, just kind of to conclude today, and then if you guys need to stay after, I can help you fix your programs. Okay? Or if you had homework questions, stay after class today. Okay? But let's just do our array list thing. We're supposed to make an array list today. Okay. So we're going to make him as a public or private instance variable. And we'll make him type array list. And we're going to use these generic modifiers. It's a less than symbol, a greater than symbol. They're called generic tags or generic modifier. And inside of the generic modifier, you put what type of object the array list is going to hold. So he's going to hold the type of object I created in that template, and I named educational income data. If you named it something else, you would put that type in between these two modifiers here. So this just says, hey, we're going to make an object of type array list, and that array list is going to hold educational income data objects. I can call him my list, or my list, or my array list, or something to that effect. And he can equal a new. Now we can make a constructor and construct him, or we can just construct him outside. And notice that I'm calling that array list with the same modifier, and then calling the default constructor. Now it's red underlined because I need to include the library that contains the array list. So if I hover over array list, my first quick fix is to import java.util.arraylist. Notice it's so utilized, it's in the util library. So you put your array list in there. And then are you guys getting a red underline here? Okay. It's because my JRE, or my Java runtime environment, is using a lower runtime environment that does not support generics. So I will fix that after class. It's not that hard to fix. But if yours is giving you that error, you just can't put the parameterized modifier in there. Okay, that generic modifier. But that's how you create an array list. Pretty easy, right? Just tell it you want an array list. All right, now to insert something in your array list, we should at least insert something in our array list today. This will be the last thing we do. It's pretty easy to insert in our array list. You just put mylist.add. Notice that the add method takes an object as its parameter, and you just add in that new record. And voila, it's adding it all into the array list. I think that's a good place to stop today, I guess. Sure. So I just put mylist.add and then my new record that I created. To where I declared and instantiated him. Now note that with the generic modifiers or that parameterized list, it does make your code more safe and more type specific, because your array list won't be allowed to hold other things, other objects. Without the parameterization, I can hold other objects and it doesn't make it type safe. Okay. Now he should run no problem. And we aren't doing anything with the array list as of yet. So So I think this is a good place to stop. I'm not going to have you guys turn it in today. We'll continue working on this next week. Now you do have some homework, remember. If you didn't finish your last homework, get in there and start, work on this. Make sure you take your quiz. Okay, and I'll get in there and check the answers tonight to make sure all the answers are right. And then last but not least, if today was hard for you, go home and practice doing this again. Okay? And I'll actually upload my code too. But yeah, you could practice doing this again on your own at home. Okay, you have the data. I attach the data. Try doing it without looking at the code that you already wrote. And then you have the code that you already wrote to fall back onto, but try to do it without looking at it. This is good practice.